Hello, everybody, and welcome to No Code Interviews. So this is a first. This is a very first of hopefully a recurring monthly series of interviews with the makers and people behind like no code tools and services. And today, I'm so thrilled and happy that Sean accepted my invitation. So I'm joined by Sean Montgomery, who is the CEO of Xano. Hi, Sean. How you doing?
Hey guys, yeah, very excited to be here.
And you're joining us from California. Is that correct?
Yeah, Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Okay, so it's about what 10 a.m. for you, something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, and I think we have hopefully some of folks coming from France because this is a live stream that is broadcasted on the No Code France Twitch channel. So it's a little late for them. It might be around like 7, I think 7 p.m. over there. We're going to start a little slow just to give everybody a chance to join us. But so as I said, Sean is the CEO of Xano. Xano is a no-code backend solution. We're going to go into detail of what that means, what Xano is, and all of that, as well. Hopefully, some kind of learnings about Sean himself as the maker behind those tools. But for now, if you could indulge me while we wait for people to join, just taking a couple of minutes to provide a little bit of context for everybody around like what is this? What is this live stream? So as I said, it's part of the No Code Friends program. I think it's not just me. We have now about like 10 or 50, 10 or 20, sorry, like live streamers that do like recurring events every day. I see Alex on the channel, who's like the founding team, a founding member of the No Code Friends. So a lot of people now every week do those programs, live stream on Twitch. So it's really turning into a no code TV at this point. The one thing I got to say, one thing about No Code Friends, I've only been involved over the last few months, but it's a great community, and I believe it's the largest no code community in the world. Those are strong words, but I think that's the case with about 5,000 users. And it's not just the number. It's like the community is very vibrant, and they have a very useful like Slack channel, and people are having a lot, like helping each other a lot in there. So hopefully this is this is the first content in English. Everything else is in French. So this is an experiment to kind of open the horizon of no code France to the North America and the rest of the world, and hopefully the other around as well. It's like being able to surface some tools and makers to this community of French no-code users. So we'll see how it goes. One word about me before we dive into the Xano. I'm George Duverger. I'm the head of product at DraftBeat. DraftBeat is a tool to make mobile application, like native, like iOS and Android mobile app, without having to code, with no code. And so I won't go into a sales speech about DraftBeat, but I do want to mention one differentiator, because I think it's relevant for this discussion, is that we're pretty agnostic of what backend you use at DraftBeat. We really focus on what we're good at and just do the front end for your mobile application. Which means you have to figure out what backend you want to use, and there are a few options out there. And Xano is one of those options. And as a little side note, and at the risk of losing all credibility in less than 5 minutes in this live stream, but I'm personally a huge fan of Xano. I've been using it for a few months now. I think I'm a pretty active user, but maybe Sharon tell me otherwise. Maybe other users are way more active than myself. But I've really enjoyed it professionally at DraftBeat, personally for side project. It's my go-to solution now for backend. I was going to say it's my go-to solution for no-code backend, but it's also become my go-to solution for backend in general. So as a former software engineer, I've built backend and databases and APIs for many years, and now, as of a few months ago, I've really kind of crossed that threshold of now not wanting to do it myself anymore and just relying on a no-code solution like Xano. So that's been part of my no-code journey. So I'm really, that's kind of a big reason why I'm extremely excited to have Sean today. So with that said, I think we're good for the introduction. I'm gonna keep an eye on the chats. I think Sean, you also have access. You should, I hope, be able to see them. But we got a few people joining in. So hi everybody. It's I recognize some name from the No Code Friends. We'll see. And Julien is here. Alex is here. Alex make a good point that it's a subject that is not necessarily covered by the typical kind of no-code video, like the backend side of thing. And so he's really excited, as he's saying here, to be able to like learn more about Xano. So that'll be exciting. If anybody joining, if you have questions for Sean, just drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best. I can't guarantee anything, but I'll do my best to surface those questions every now and then. All right, so here's how I thought we could have this discussion. Sean, tell me what you think. I wanted to break it down into 3 themes, and the first one was going to be dive like right in the product, talk about Xano, what's a backend, what's a no-code backend, what is Xano, what can I do with it, like what's the value that I get out of it, and how does it work. And then the second theme, I'm personally very curious about Xano as a company, and as a product manager myself, I'm of a no-code tool. I'm curious to know how you guys have dealt with some of those challenges. So I want that to be, I have a few questions there. And then last but not least, I would love, if we have a little bit of time, to get into your personal journey, like where you're coming from, what was your like entrepreneurial kind of adventure over the years. I know you've been in tech for quite some time and work at very exciting companies and work on exciting projects. So I want to hopefully get a chance to cover that. So we're doing a little bit of reverse. Sometimes people do starting with your introduction by you at the beginning. We're going to do it at the end, but hopefully I'll make something that makes sense at the end. Yeah, how does that sound?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. I won't talk as much now that I'm done with my introduction. I'll chill a little bit. Just want to give everybody a chance of understanding the context. So, with that said, we have an hour or so. Let's start with the first kind of big theme that I would like to discuss with you is Xano as the product. So, a no-code backend. I'm curious to get us started, ask a couple of questions like what's a backend in your words, and not just the no-code version, the traditional version, and then more specifically, what is a no-code backend? Like what are the differences? And I want to obviously all that leads to what is Xano and what is specific about Xano. So would you mind kind of getting us started with kind of those
absolutely.
questions?
Yeah. So a backend really, it starts with the server. You need something to run everything. Then there tends to be a database. Some people use MySQL. We use Postgres. There's also MongoDB. There's a bunch of different backend solutions that all have subtleties that make it unique, all pros and cons to each one. Then you need the API layer. So the API layer is responsible for getting the data from the backend, potentially transforming it, and then returning it to whoever is requesting the API. So that could be you using a curl command. It could be your front end website. It could be your mobile application. It could be your Swagger documentation. Like whatever you're fetching, the API layer is just responsible for returning it in the format that you're expecting. Right. So that that API. So part of that transformation journey. So ultra simple, you've got, let's say we have a database table of blogs, and super simple, just title and description. If you're saying, hey, give me a list of blogs, there's a chance it's just like a pass through, right? So literally all it's doing is bringing it one way from A to B. But as you start getting more complex, you might need to reshape that response. You also might need to enforce access permissions, and that's called business logic. Like who's allowed to do this? If someone else tries to do this and they aren't allowed, is it a big deal? Do we just throw an error, or do we notify someone? Like all those nuances with like, oh, what about that? What about this? That all gets kind of encapsulated into business logic, and that's the stuff that really makes your product at the end of the day unique. Like everyone starts out with like a nice easy demo and you're like, wow, this is so simple. But as you start getting towards the finish line, that's where you really got to drill down, and the devil's in the details on that.
And to be clear, so this piece of the puzzle is something that 99% of every app and website out there is using. Like you do need a backend. This is not kind of a nice to have, or like every time you interact with dynamic data or some kind of logic, you're gonna have that, right? For people who kind of joining us and maybe don't wonder like
Yeah,
how
yeah,
critical that
so
is.
I'd say 99% of the times you do, right? The general rule of thumb is if you need to store something in a persistent manner, like user information, like, hey, I just updated my password, that password better exist tomorrow, right? Then you need a backend, right? So it's really about persistent storage and then interpreting that storage when you need to access it.
Got it. And so, what was it like? You've been in the tech industry for
Yeah, around 20 years.
20 years.
Yeah.
So, without going into too much detail, but what was it like to deal with, to handle such a list of feature, like to have a backend like 20 years ago? What was the difficulties? What were the challenge? And kind of want to compare that to nowadays and where we're at.
Yeah. So one thing I definitely learned through this journey is that what I knew in the beginning was not correct. Right. So there's a lot of lessons learned, and you really kind of got to be humble. Um, part of this journey. So I was fortunate enough to be at Google for 6.5 years, and so I did get a degree in computer science, a bachelor's. So I definitely knew uh, the low level details on how to do things. But when you to really do it back in the right way, you kind of need on the job experience. And one nice thing about Google is that you basically have super good talent, way better than you. Um, and I remember a time when I was there, I went to the bookshelf and I was looking at this book, and then I turned to my right, and that was the author. He's just
That's
standing
pretty
there.
cool.
So
It's a good
yeah,
source
it's
of
like you're
information.
like, what the hell? So you really get to learn best practices there. So and then after that journey, I worked on I did a development agency for 10 years, right? So you kind of there's nothing better than client driven real world experience. So it's not you like thinking, I bet everyone's going to want to do it this way. It's
Right.
actually paying clients, telling you what they want, and then you shaping the product to handle that, right? So it's definitely like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known what to do, but because of this, and this was not like a quick solution. Eventually, it just got shaped enough and hardened where it was able to do whatever we needed. So, um, I'm very excited to be present right now because it's an exciting time, and we got
Yeah.
this amazing tool.
And from a user point of view, what does I guess what would be a good definition of now of a no code backend? Like what are the differences? What are the advantage of it? Like why should I use a no code backend and not have an engineer, work on a more traditional solution for it?
Yeah. So this hopefully this comes out the right way. But part of running your own dev agency is trying to actually be profitable. So money comes in, and you want to have money not go out, right? So
That's the idea.
part of that is, employee costs. Employees cost a lot of money. So part of the motivation was to have this tool set, and um, during this journey, like the early days of Xano it was kind of like our secret weapon. So it was this internal tool. No one had access to it, but it was just making our lives a whole lot easier. But by basically standardizing the back end process, it allowed us to have less employees and
Mm.
remain a small team, but still be reasonably profitable, right? So fast forward to what it is now. The reason why we were so interested in no code and not low code, I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
true no code, was because I wanted to take this kind of like methodology to uh, the finish line here and have it so that anyone could technically do it. You still need to understand development concepts, but you don't need to do actual coding. And I also think there's going to be this paradigm shift where eventually it's going to be. So the nice thing about having this no code tool with the UI is that it's actually more powerful than writing code, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean that we've got the perfect answer right now. I think we've got a really good answer, but over the years, this will keep progressing, and eventually you'll be able to do these high order functions um, that you well, like. Why would you want to type that out? Like it's almost
Mm-hmm.
like you're doing solutions on the fly instead
Mm-hmm.
of the intimate details of that solution. So that's kind of the journey I want to go on. And it's a little weird. Like I know a lot of people are getting into technology, especially development. So it's kind of weird. Like, why would you want to not develop? So it's a little taboo there, right? We're kind of like cannibalizing that a little bit. There's still a whole lot more. It's not like this is a one-stop shop for all development in the world. Right now, there's
Right.
just back end stuff. But yeah, that's kind of the motivation behind it.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. And so it's been interesting because my experience, as I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, was like I knew how to make a database and an API pretty quickly at the end. It will just take me a few minutes, and so I always had this mentality of like, all those no code tools are great for people who don't know how to do it themselves. But and I encourage them, and they're like, yeah, it's great. It open up a new demographics, like you can have access to it if you don't know the code. But why would someone who do know the code do that? And like, it's been interesting internally for myself to witness that switch of like just changing your mindset and be like, why would I write all those things? Like, I'm exposing myself to bugs, just even time consuming, and getting it's been fascinating to see the quality and the professionalism of those solutions go up over the last month and maybe year, to the point that I'm now very confident. Maybe I was never the best engineer, but I'm very confident that you guys can do a better job than I would as an engineer building it myself. And not only that, but it also is going to scale, without me having to think about it. So it's
Yeah, I've noticed or at least throughout my career, that there's kind of like these stages. Like in the beginning, it's all about doing everything yourself, like hand rolling everything, because it's always got to
mm,
be super fast. And there's a chance people, you probably don't even know what fast is, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, but you always got to do it custom because it will be bleeding edge performance. And you kind of just want to have this like ownership, like I did this. But as
yeah,
you kind of like progress in your journey, and it comes at different times for everyone, it could be years and years, but eventually you're like, well, I already am confident I know how to do this. I don't think I need to prove anything to someone else. Why would I need to keep hand rolling everything especially when I've already done it a million times, right? So
mm-hmm,
if there's a tool that lets me do the same thing, why not use it, right? That's kind
yeah.
of where I'm at.
So I want to address one question that was asked in the chat from Alex. So just going back to what you said before, like, just to clarify, so it was an internal tool, right, that you guys use inside your agency and kind of refine for yourself before you
Yeah,
turn that into a product that other people can use, correct?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So basically, it was a command line tool. So it would at sometimes it would auto generate code. Other times it would kind of be the engine, and you kind of give it this configuration file, and it would describe how APIs work. But there was zero UI, right? So
Yeah.
you basically needed to believe that this tool could do the job, and employees of the company. I mean, 100% they were on board with that, but yeah, no one else knew about it. We didn't even want other people to know about it because it allowed us to just be more efficient. Like, so instead of having a 10-person team, we could have like a 4-person team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, approximately like 2 hours, or sorry, not 2 years ago, um, my good friend Prakash, who's also a co-founder,
Mm-hmm.
he also is at Google, but he was on the design front. Um, he worked on Google Enterprise and also Google Calendar. He specializes in just really really good user flows and
Mm-hmm.
conflict management. Like you want a UI that just kind of knows what you're trying to do and deals with all the issues in a nice fashion. So he saw he was able to basically peek behind the curtain, see like, hey, we've been doing all these client projects for years and years and years. Seems like it's working. The fact that we were still in business, I think, implies that
Yep.
it's working. So he was like, I think it's time to put this UI on top of it, productize it, and give this to the world. So it was a little like it's kind of a weird paradigm shift because you're basically doing client work, generating certain amounts of profit, and then you're like, well, we want to do this no code tool, which is our secret weapon, but now all of a
Mm.
sudden people are going to use it. So that's basically cannibalizing the development agency, right?
Right.
So that's uh, I actually think, I mean, well, I hope I should think this because we're doing it, but I think it's excuse me, the long term play. It's going to be a million times bigger, right? Because you can only do
Mm.
so many projects.
Right. You're
Um,
limited. Yeah.
yeah, but so in the beginning, obviously, it's not going to feel that great, right? Because you've got all this development revenue, and then you're switching over to subscription revenue. But now that there's some momentum behind it, it's all of a sudden like this appears to be a good idea, and let's just
Mm-hmm.
keep growing it and growing it and growing it, right?
Right. So I'm actually going to jump ahead because of what you said. Like, so when Prakash mentioned, or you as a group decided, like, we could add a UI to that and make it like a real product. And still today, like, what's your philosophy or what's your approach towards product design, and not in the visual sense, but like particularly for a backend, and that's something we also notice on the front end at DriveBit. You have to figure out a way to abstract a lot of the concepts. And so when you look at Xano, you got the concept of an API, which is this one is pretty obvious, but then in the product, you've decided to break it down into, just as an example, like your input and your function stack and your response, and like all of that seems obvious after the fact. Like to me as a user, which is
Yes.
testament to how good you guys are. Like it all makes sense. But I know for a fact that those are not obvious when you have to like design them from a user experience point of view. How, how did you go about it? Just by instinct, by kind of talent, or like any kind of philosophy behind it, or?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird journey because like now it's clear as day, like, oh, that's how you would do it. But I remember when uh, we have a patent pending on our function stack um, technology,
Yeah.
and I remember talking to the attorney and kind of like it was kind of like a warm intro and telling him about it, and he's like I don't think that's possible. Like I mean, telling anyone like a no code tool for no for backends where you don't need to code,
Mm-hmm.
like no one believes it, right? You don't believe it until it's there. So the thing that we noticed, like most in the so there's been multiple iterations, but the majority of back or of doing APIs starts out with literally just querying the database, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you can put logic in the database with conditionals, it's SQL statements, selects, you can do where statements, you can do aggregates. I mean, a lot of it is really just that. So in the beginning, it was just like a tool to manipulate, to basically generate SQL, right? So anything you
Mm-hmm.
can write in SQL, you would just need a UI on top of that. But then there was like, oh, but then I want to send an email. Then I want to do, oh, but if this user has that, then I want to do that. And then, oh, what happens if I get a bunch of users back? Maybe I want to send lots of emails, an email to each person. So that's kind of where the function stack came into view, where it was like, okay, and it seems so simple now, but it was like, we got to be, so in the beginning, it was like one statement, just query. We had the most flexible, we called it query all records, right? So just query the database in a flexible manner. We're basically assuming SQL can solve the problems.
Right.
But then it was like, well, what happens when you want a tiny bit more? What happens if you want to query multiple things? Right?
Different database, different
Right. So then it
table.
was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, now we got this stack. It really feels crazy simple now.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, well, we got conditionals. Well, then it sounds like maybe the stack has hierarchy. So, and then loops. Okay, well, loops would be, it's kind of like continuing that hierarchy.
When I
And then
realized you guys had loops, that was a fascinating find. Just the concept of having a loop in that function stack was
yeah.
very
So
cool.
so when you really kind of try to dumb it down to nuts and bolts, it's really just each statement has input, could be one input, could be no input, could be a lot of inputs, and output, right? So just funneling, it's almost like wires. It's almost like or like a networking box with all these different wires. You're just funneling the path, right? Variables go here. So that's an oversimplification, but that's kind of basic. So once we realize, like, oh my God, we just need, it's really just about this stack, with hierarchy, with ins and outs. Then we had to create a UI on top. Actually, before the UI, we did this all with a configuration file. So it was actually YAML files, which is
Interesting.
basically nicely formatted JSON, if anyone doesn't know what that is. So uh, that allowed us to do this proof of concept without having to do any UI. And then then we were talking with Prakash. We're like, I think this is going to work, and it's really just a stack. So we did a couple of different designs. In the beginning, it was terrible. They were functional but terrible. We had to keep redesigning it, making it more minimalistic because it can get overwhelming.
Right. Yeah. You have
So
to.
much stuff. What's going on? And like the version we have now, I think is really good, but I think it could even be better than that because it's really about and to just dig a little bit deeper, is that you really want, at the end of the day, you want to, the way you talk about what this API is doing is what you should see, right? If you had to tell your grandpa what this API is doing, it better be pretty lightweight, right? So it would be like, all right, I want to query users that signed up today. Okay. I then want to loop through those and then send an email. So that would be three things, right?
Right.
So we better see three things on that function stack, right? So it should be synonymous with how you describe it. That's kind of our mentality behind it. Sometimes there's little bits of nuance on each particular statement. Like you may want to use this value versus another one, which is technically a conditional, and if this, then that. The problem with conditionals is that it just makes the function stack experience larger,
Right.
literally
Yeah.
visually larger. So there's lots of cool things that we do. We call them filters, where you can basically hide logic on particular values, because each statement may have like 5 inputs, right? So you could tweak just one input, but without making the vertical real estate
Right.
on the display polluted, right? You want
Right.
to keep
Yeah.
it lean and mean. So there's definitely like an art to hiding logic from the high level view. You're not hiding it forever, but just so that you can keep talking about things in like this high level manner. So yeah, that's kind of how we are going about it.
Yeah, I think the filter is a good example of the type of product design decision that you guys have made that might seem obvious now, but simplify tremendously the experience. I know at DriveBit we have a fairly similar example where we can apply a transformation to a data, and so it's kind of the same idea of like you get your information, your data, and you kind of enhance it or massage it or do something with it or filter it, and yeah, like it's easy to think that it's obvious after the fact, but it doesn't. It's not necessarily the case. I'm curious
Yeah, so
to.
we
Go ahead.
actually so in the development world, I may be mixing up who did this first, but we used the Twig templating language, which is just basically a way to do templates, mostly in HTML, but it can apply to um, other things, anything where you want to just auto generate stuff. So basically, all a filter is technically nested functions, right?
Mm,
So you could have, like, let's say you have a function that like capitalizes, or let's say you have a variable title, and then you have
yeah,
a function that capitalizes it, and then you have another function that lowercases it, which would reverse it. But I'm just trying to make this
yeah, yeah.
lengthy. And then you have another one that uh, reverses the letters, right? So we capitalized it, or we uppercased it, we lowercased it, and then we reversed the letters. So previously, the way you would do this is that you would just keep having functions on top of functions on top of functions, and it got really messy, right? Because it kept getting longer and longer and longer,
Yeah.
and the functions were applying to the input of the other function. But then Twig came along, or it might have been Angular JS, but it might have been someone else. I don't know. I'm sure people are borrowing ideas, and we're like, well, you know what? Really, all this is just if you reorder this instead of kind of like this recursive thing, it's actually you do one thing and then some people call them pipe filters.
Right.
You then chain them together, and that's kind of we're like, oh my god, all of a sudden that feels a million. I mean, it's the same thing,
Right.
but
A
it's just a
different way to think of
different
it.
way to kind of like understand it and visualize it, and
Hmm.
it just like removes kind of like the complexity behind it because no one wants to see five functions next to each other, one input
Nested.
after
Yeah.
another. But if it's like stacked, like, hey, first we're doing this, then we're doing that, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I know what's happening, right? So
Yeah. It's
you
much
just
easier
kind
to
of,
process in your
yeah,
head. Yeah. And you guys also do a good job at, I mean, I can only imagine you pay attention to in the UI, the way you describe the function, like the literal sentence is as close as possible, at least from my point of view, to like an English sentence, which makes it again very easy to understand what's in the function. You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah.
that variable. Like I don't have a good example off the top of my head, but like that's another challenge we're going through, and so it was interesting to see how you guys handle that. I want to do a couple of things because there are a few people who are asking for a demo. We're probably not going to do a demo here today, but I'll figure out a time to do a demo either with the Xano folk or by myself. Like for people who are more visual. I want to give just a high level. Let's talk about we talk about specific about what the feature of Xano are, and I want to take a little bit of a step back and for people who are new to it, understand. So Xano essentially gives you your database, your API, and inside your API, you have a way to add some logic, and that's the
Yeah,
function stack
and
that
the
we.
server that runs it.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. All of that is hosted. Yeah, absolutely. You have other stuff beyond that. So those are kind of the most two obvious thing that any backend solution has. But you guys have functions, right? That you can like reuse. You have cron job essentially. Like you have like a time-based job scheduler. You can run things every day if you want to automate like a cleaning up your database or whatever it is. You have, correct me if I'm wrong, you also have a marketplace. Like you
Yep.
have an entire ecosystem around that solution now. And you have also a few exciting features that are probably giving us a glimpse of what the future is like. Like you've done like the equivalent, I don't know how to phrase it properly, but like a staging environment. Right now I can test with like, I can use the API with like a test database essentially. You also have a cache, you also have a way to monetize thing. Can you just, maybe without going into detail of all those features, but give us a sense of like, where is all that going? Like, what's the end goal? Is it parity to the traditional tool? Is that, do you have a vision for what the end goal is, or you're just
Yeah,
adding stuff as the user need them?
yeah. I'll start first with the versioning. So this is people kind of like throw this word around, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of people. But we kind of like took a step back, and we believe that this version journey really is kind of like three pieces. The first thing is we want schema versioning. So what that means is on both the database and the APIs, the functions, anything that's like describing the business logic. So that just means, and that's pretty simple to understand. Basically, it just means that if you make a change, you've got a history of that change, and if you made a mistake, you can roll it back. And that also lets you see, oh, it looks like my other coworker did something. You can see what they did, right? So that's super handy. That's already live. The next thing is the environments, right? So previously, you had, even though we had this versioning on the schema, you still were always using the same database. So technically, if you made a mistake, things could have been not so great, right? Because it's real, it's your real data. And depending on the mistake, it could be screwing things up for your customers, right? So that's where environments were. So basically, you had to tiptoe around. And thankfully, there hasn't been anything that I'm aware of where anyone screwed anything up. But it was definitely a ticking time bomb, something that we wanted to address. So that's where we introduced environments. And for certain plans, it's live or test, very similar to Stripe, like live or test.
Yep.
Our enterprise package lets you create other environments. So you could have like, here's all my demo data. I'm testing this, but I don't want other people to screw things up. So it just allows you to, it's basically just working with more people. But the environments just allow you to have different data sets where it's okay to screw everything up because it's not affecting your production data, right? So you don't have to tiptoe around it. So the third, and that's also live, right? The third thing, which is what we're almost done with, is what we call branch support. So what that means is that allows you to basically version your API, right? So again, you are technically altering the API on the fly. So if you have to make like 3 different edits to bring this to where you want to be, you're kind of breaking things.
You're doing it live, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you're doing it live.
Yep, not good.
So, so obviously not ideal. Still works, right? I mean, so maybe things are screwed up for a couple of seconds. Not the end of the world, but it'd be great to not have any issues, right? So this basically allows you to just have, you say, hey, I want a new branch, which then lets the existing APIs remain as is. Like you don't have to worry, like that's still working just fine. All your customers are all good, but allows you to work on different versions. And then when you're done, you're like, all right, this looks good. And we have ways to like use this API versus another API. You then set that live and then repeat the process, right? You keep doing a new version, but you're just bringing that live label to where it's supposed to be, right? So that's, we're in the middle of that. A week or two that should be live. And
nice.
I then think we have fulfilled our obligation for this versioning journey. I'm sure someone else will come up with some other nuance, but we're definitely covering a lot.
Yeah.
So for the majority of users, that should be more than enough.
That sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to that for sure. I want to take a little, like switch gear a little bit from the features of Xano and talk about another topic that I would want to hear you on is the community. Like you guys have a pretty active community website. I've been posting on it. I've got response from you in a matter of minutes, and not only just the response, but the change on prod for like not a missing feature, but like a requested filter, sorry, things like that. So I kind of want to understand, like, where do you guys sit? Like, how do you think of your community? Because I can also imagine, I mean, I know that from my experience at DriveBait, like, because you're doing a no-code tool, you including a lot of people who might not have the knowledge of like what's a client, what's a server, what's an API, and so and I know because you're also an early stage company that you have limited time and bandwidth to handle both the product and the customer support. So how do you manage to answer your community? How is that important for you? Do you put a limit? Do you like probably wrong term, but do you filter your user through like an ideal user and you spend more time on those people than maybe others? Like, how do you approach community support like that?
Yeah. So the first thing is, so a no code tool, because you can't code, even though you're doing coding concepts, is that if there's something missing, then it's our obligation to make sure it's not missing, right? So, and so Xano is Turing complete, which means that it can technically do anything that you can do in a programming language, but that doesn't mean that it's a joy to do everything you can do in a programming language. So, like for example, a user recently said, "Hey, it'd be awesome if you had a filter that would shuffle an array," right? So technically that's not needed, right? You could do a for loop and then change your index and do it yourself, but that kind of feels annoying, and that's really heavy. It'd be great. And shuffling array is not like cutting edge awesome. It'd be great to just rely on that being there. So that was, and that would be part of the filter. So filters are super easy for us to do, and it's very quick because there's no real, it's basically takes arguments, has a response, and it's got a description. Boom, all of a sudden it's there, right? And then we implement the code behind the scenes. So like filters will do same days sometimes, right? So yeah, that's not a problem at all. But we definitely want to make sure, sometimes we need more bigger picture stuff. Like for example, like we're also working on Apple OAuth, which some people don't care about. Some people, it's like, you got to have Apple. And I think there's certain requirements. If you're in the App Store, you need Apple OAuth. The issue with Apple OAuth is that it requires some this is getting very technical, but like elliptical curve cryptography. And you're like, what the hell? People probably don't need to know what that is unless they really want to know it. So like that's something that you're like, wow, well, Apple's clearly big. We don't want to turn people off if they're trying to get in the App Store. So that's something that is definitely at like the top of the list. We're like, we better make sure it's possible to do this elliptical curve stuff. Hopefully abstract that away, because that's like crazy. But that wouldn't be a filter. That's definitely a more big kind of like fancy feature. But still, if we're not letting people code, it's got to be possible, right? So we're just trying to make it so that like the worst thing is having a project and you're like at 99%.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, well, it'd be nice to do that, but I can't. And then you start doing like weird solutions or bringing in Zapier or different, like trying to reroute things. And it just, you kind of like lose the like, hey, this is awesome.
Right.
So we're trying to avoid that. We want everyone to get to 100%.
Got it. That's actually great. So I was going to transition to talk a little bit more about the company itself and how you guys are structured. So like what you describe is essentially, how you guys handle prioritization of features. How do you go about deciding what you're going to be working on? Can you tell us a little bit, just a high level for people who don't know the company, Xano the company, how many people are you guys? How is it structured? How many like engineers, non-engineers, founding members, and all of that, just to get an idea of what the team is?
Yeah, the team's small. So
we got
three co-founders, myself included.
Okay.
We have a customer success lead, Michael, who's
Yeah.
world famous now.
Yeah.
Everybody knows him from YouTube. Um, we are able to piggyback on some of our development staff from the development agency.
hmm
And
Is
we
that
previous
agency still running, by the way? Sorry to interrupt.
it's we're not actively going after, but it's like it's being
Got it.
maintained, right?
Yep.
Because existing customers don't want to. You don't want to say, "Hey, we're moving to bigger and
Bye
better
bye.
things." See you later.
It was nice when
But
it lasted.
yeah, it's definitely idling, but there's still a small touch to just make sure everyone's still good.
Got it.
And then we have one more engineer, right? So I
Got it.
am the main engineer, right? So uh, even though my title is CEO, I'm basically CTO. Um,
Yeah.
this is basically my life's work,
That is
and the
awesome.
only way it could be possible is if I'm like literally addicted to it. And I've been doing this for, I mean, I do it for fun, seven
Yeah.
days a week, all day long. I love it, right? So, and especially where we are now, the nice thing about now it's actually being used by a lot of people is
hmm
that now you kind of get this like awesome feedback loop of actually helping people,
hmm
and that feels pretty damn good, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, your community side is very active and vibrant. So you got a lot of people helping each other. You guys are very responsive. So it seems like a very like a passion project. Everybody seems to be very
Yeah,
excited about it.
so we it wouldn't have been possible without the co-founder team, like because Prakash is crazy good. I like to think I'm crazy good at engineering. The other co-founder, Jack, is awesome at bringing everything together. Like he specializes in SEO and marketing.
hmm
So like people aren't stepping on each other's toes, but we don't actually need to rely on outside help to make things work, right? So um, we definitely want to rely, like we can't do everything, but at least like if everyone disappears, we can actually rely on the co-founder team to keep
hmm
the product
Yeah.
moving forward, which is super awesome. You don't want to have like your main technology developer like move off to a better opportunity, and then you're like, well, what happened to
Yeah. A year
this?
in. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're able to just keep this thing going, um, which I think is very powerful. That's not common. That's like hard to, and this wouldn't have been possible without us being friends. We've been friends for 20 plus years, so
Nice.
it's kind of
So I guess that it's so much, I was going to ask you, like, how do you guys typically collaborate? Like, how do you come up with idea? How do you debate them, disagree, agree? But I mean, it might be just part of that friendship now that you've had for so long. You know to communicate very well, I assume.
yeah. So I mean, we have a hefty backlog of all these different ideas. We try the way to get things bumped up to the top is community basically complaining about something. Um, if it's one person saying something and it's an easy fix, I mean, sometimes that takes like an hour, so not a big deal.
Right.
If there's a lot of voices on a particular topic, definitely important. And then the other deciding factor is what features actually are going to help generate more revenue, right? If this feature makes things more useful and we get more users from it, well,
hmm
that's definitely some incentive, right? So that's kind of like how we go about it. And then after all that, there's still like, well, what's the, 'cause we're trying to see the future
hmm
and where we want to go before everyone else. So it's like, how can we get to this point? Sometimes things overlap, sometimes they don't. But yeah, that's kind of like all the deciding factors on things.
It's a good, I was going to ask specifically about that. Like, how do you, so you mentioned what might help get things prioritized is if, you know, you can see an opportunity to get more revenue from it. How do you guys approach your business model? I know you have three plans plus kind of the agency and enterprise. How do you come up with that? How do you decide and what are the repercussions on the product? Do you end up spending more time? Like, do you have an ideal situation where most people would be on the kind of the equivalent of a starter plan and just kind of kick the tire a little bit and still do interesting stuff? But do you try to discourage that through pricing and want to focus more on people who are more serious and more like project of a bigger scales? Like, how do you approach your business model and your pricing plans overall?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And like at first glance, I remember thinking like, oh, just let's just put up a pricing page and call it a day. But we're still fine tuning it, and it takes up more time than you would hope.
Yeah.
So originally, we wanted to have a free plan um, that is not like an embarrassment, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can actually be productive. Just don't take advantage of it, and that's kind of where we have rate limiting.
Mm.
But if you're just playing around doing something once a day or something, I mean, you might as well use the free plan. So then we wanted to have, okay, well, even though we like people using the free plan, and that's kind of like us giving back to the community, this is a business. So, what would be something useful but not breaking the bank, right?
Right.
So that's why we came up with. So we were trying to think like, well, what are all the different options? So one big deciding factor is shared resources versus dedicated, right? So
Mm.
when you're just starting out, you probably don't care if it's dedicated, right? Big
Fair enough.
corporations
Yeah.
definitely care. If performance becomes a problem, you definitely care.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just trying to do this MVP and you need a little bit more firepower than the free plan, there should be an option for you. And that's kind of where, so the free plan we call our build plan. And then the next up, which is still on shared resources, is launch. So you're
Mm-hmm.
basically launching, it could be launching an MVP. It wouldn't be a crazy launch, but when you are ready to then scale, so we got build, launch, scale, which I think is super awesome. Prakash came up with that. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a natural journey,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like if you're like, this is working, I'm ready to scale. Well, you better be dedicated. You better be able to scale, which means more servers and resources. So it kind of like all comes into play. And then there's still more. Uh, when you're more serious about certain things, we have other features, and that's like the versioning stuff. When you're a one man team, you kind of don't care about that as much. You might care about some features. So that's kind of why we're trying to um, differentiate the different packages
Mm-hmm.
where we don't like, we want to have this natural journey where like we're not trying to funnel everyone to our most expensive plan.
Right.
That'd be awesome financially, but we're trying to actually uh, be on your side a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
so and lead you down this journey. Another thing, previously we had when we launched regional support, which is your server in a geographical region, because that sometimes that network routing overseas or from Los Angeles to Australia or I mean wherever India, wherever you
Mm-hmm.
are, can be terrible, right? If you've got a company in India and all your customers are in India, well, why are you sending APIs to Los Angeles, right?
Right.
Even though it still works, but there's all this extra latency and it just kind of feels slow. And then
Mm.
you're like, is Xano slow? So at one point we had, like when we were first getting started, regional support was only for the most expensive plan. But then
Mm.
we were like, well, why are we penalizing people for where they live? Originally, it was kind of like we were trying to we didn't have that many differentiating factors. So we kind of just needed stuff. So we're like, regional support sounds good. You got to pay extra for it. But then we were favoring the US
That's a good
and
point.
penalizing other people. And through this journey, we've realized that like it's hit home that different countries have different currencies and
Mm.
the ratio of one currency to the other is sometimes not that great. And is that their fault? So it's just, there's like a lot of challenges here. So we're like, we got to, the free plan remains in the US, but any paid plan should be regional. or should have regional support. We're not going to
Yeah.
penalize people. If people want to upgrade to a premium plan, they don't need to go to the most expensive plan to get something in their region. So
Right.
yeah, that's
That's a very good take on it. I haven't heard that before, and it makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it's nobody's fault where you live, so like that should not be a worse
yeah. I mean, you can only do
experience.
so much because I mean, some countries are having some trouble, and it's not like you can't make the product free for everything. So,
Hmm.
but I mean, you kind of like slowly chip away on it and try to make things more accessible the best you can.
Yeah, I was couple of weeks ago talking about pricing. I was doing a little napkin math, little napkin calculation, where I was looking at specifically the stack for a mobile app. So obviously at DriveBit we do mobile apps and not like web apps. So I was focusing on that. But like if you were to think of like the entire A to Z stack, like you need a bit of design. So you got your Figma that's essentially free, and then if you decide to use DriveBit, it's certain price, but you have other alternative around the same price, and then you got Xano, and maybe at the end of it, you got your like Apple, like $100 developer account, and through all of that, I was looking at the annual plan, and if you do the math at the end of the day, like the monthly cost to being able to build, I'm not talking about like obviously like labor and time spent and stuff like that, but just the building part from a technological point of view ended up being around like $130 a month, which I might since then I think both DriveBit and Xano might have tweaked their pricing plan a little bit, but the idea remains. It was like under $150 to build something, and particularly in the case of a mobile app, something that scale. Like you can have that being used by like thousands, if not millions of users. And I know you guys do a great job of scaling too. And just
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because people like with us, people compare us to Linode or DigitalOcean. You're like, well, I could just get a DigitalOcean server for $10. You're like, well, yeah, but that doesn't do anything, right? You still got to do everything. So,
right,
like at the end of the day, these no code tools are allowing you to not pay someone else's hourly rate, right?
right,
So you are saving tremendous. If you had to pay someone 3 hours, I mean, maybe you're 50 an hour, maybe you're 100 an hour, maybe more. Already, those 3 hours of work
that's
cost more than the pay.
it. Yeah,
But somehow that's like, I don't know. Like mentally, it's you kind of like pretend that is not there or it doesn't exist, and
yeah,
you still kind of like compare like server to server, even though there's so much more. So it's and I mean honestly, that's uh, as a company owner, it's our responsibility to make sure that it is clear that you're getting more,
yeah,
because we want to avoid that conversation. Like we're way more than just a server that sits there.
yeah.
It's there's a whole engine behind it and all that stuff, and the same stuff with DraftBit.
Yeah, no, I think I guess us humans are not the best at properly evaluating the cost of doing something wrong. Like we can see the benefit of something and the price to it, but when it comes like that's like a whole job of a product manager, right? Is to surfacing the cost of things, and so people can at least make the right decision, because it's easy to like misappropriate cost. But
I want to answer just I see one question,
oh yeah, go ahead,
and
please.
I am an expert at pronouncing names incorrectly. So
Let's give it a try.
Snefana, or it might be S dot.
It might be first name. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. They're asking why choose Xano over Firebase.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. So Firebase is a database. Xano, one part of Xano is a database. You still need to handle all the business logic. So, like, what is the API? So, if Firebase still allows you to have REST endpoints. So, like in the very beginning, I was mentioning, if you just need data to be passed through without transformation. So, like, I have it in the database, that blog example, I have a title description. All I want is a title and description. Firebase sounds great, right? Honestly, anything sounds great, right? Because you're not really doing anything. You're just,
Mm-hmm.
it's stored. and you're pulling it out and then using it. But so that's zero business logic. The issue is you tend to want to have this API layer to then manipulate, do other things with the data, log certain things, enforce access permissions. All that stuff gets thrown out the window because then you need to have this API layer. You still would use Firebase as your database, but now you need this other service, which is the API on top of it. So that's what Xano is all about. It's the one-stop shop. We have a database as well. We use Postgres. Postgres is definitely a competitor to Firebase. But I mean, technically, it could be possible for Xano to use Firebase as this database, right? So that's kind of like conceptually easier to understand. Like, oh, okay, it's one piece of the puzzle. It's not unless it's ultra simple, it's not your whole solution, right? So that's kind of hopefully that helped a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess someone else is asking now about Xano versus Superbase. Superbase is closer to what you'll get with Firebase. Like they brand themselves as an alternative to Firebase. So I guess most of your answer to Firebase is still the same for Superbase. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of players in the database space, and everyone's trying to differentiate themselves from each other, right? So they'll do different things to like kind of start doing a tiny bit of business logic. Like technically, like with SQL, you can do all business logic is like conditionals, right? Enforcing access stuff. So like a SQL statement could have that. It's the where clause, right? So give me blogs where the title is Sean, right? Mm-hmm. Technically, that's business logic. It's super simple, but there's ways to do subtle business logic in certain databases, and some of them have extra like bonuses here and there. But at the end of the day, you want complete flexibility to do whatever you want, unless you're okay saying, I'm never going to need anything complex. All I'm doing is showing a blog. Well, then you could use anything, right? Mm-hmm. But it's really kind of like how complex are you going to get? How advanced are you going to get? When you start scaling and you actually need to differentiate yourself from your own competitors, you know there's going to be something unique, right? So that's where you need that. Eventually, you come down to needing that API layer yourself. So you're actually in control of differentiating yourself from the rest of your competitors.
Right. And I guess you guys made a similar choice than we did at DriveBait to just focus on, the one thing you do. And so you guys do backend, we do front end. And so I actually think it's amazing that you can have those discussions. Like, what's the difference between this tool and these tools? Because that implies that you can pick whatever you want, whatever fits your needs. So if it's something else, like whatever you think for your need is the best tool. And same thing goes for DriveBait. Like if you use Xano and you want to do a mobile app, maybe DriveBait is better. And so for you, maybe it's something else. But like we personally feel very strongly about that. That chance to pick whatever you want, as opposed to maybe a different approach, which is to like do it all. And so I've just either Xano also do the front end, or do like I've DriveBait handle the back end. So every time I hear those questions, not only I want to answer them, but I also feel good that we have the opportunity to ask those questions. People are not stuck; they're not locked in. So
yeah, so I think that's called boiling the ocean. I love phrases like that.
Yeah.
So at one point we were thinking of doing everything, but then we realized how difficult it was. And there's like so many, like, well, we know we're good at the back end. I mean, we do this all day long. Like, and then there's like, oh, well, you got web applications, and then you've got all this responsiveness, sometimes more than just responsiveness on like tablets and mobile. And then there's native, and you're like, oh my, there's Android, and then there's iOS. And what happens if there's like hybrid solution? There's like, oh my God, there's like, we're going to bury ourselves alive here. So, and one nice thing about not doing everything is that you are now friendly with your partners, right? Which feels great. Like, we're going to make this awesome. You're going to make that awesome. Let's be friends.
If it
Right? That
works
sounds
well
good.
together, it's
Instead
perfect for
of
the
always
user.
like wanting to be cutthroat to everyone. Like that doesn't sound fun. There's definitely like something to be said about strength and numbers, and that's like your partnerships. Because I think both you can only, I mean, unless you're a superhero, yeah, you can't do everything perfectly, but you definitely can do one thing really good. So you might as
Focus on it.
well let someone else be an expert, be humble, and let someone else be an expert, and then join forces. And like back and front end is the perfect, I mean, it's the perfect pairing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great separation of concerns right there for sure. All right, I know we're getting a little over our time. I want to just, if you'll indulge me, do you have a few more minutes or do you
Yeah,
have a tight? Okay, so I want to just have a few words about you personally, kind of your journey. We talked like through those questions, we talked a little bit about that already, but just want to take a little bit of time here. And then we can have like closing thoughts a little bit about the space in general. But so I would like to understand, you studied, as you mentioned, 20 years ago, like in the Silicon Valley, I assume, in California, right?
mm-hmm.
And you worked, so can you walk us through, not necessarily just the job, but like kind of the transition and what was the motivation behind those kind of evolutions? So you work at Citrix and then Picasa, right? And then through that, you moved to
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll be real quick. So I actually started in high school, and this was before I mean, I'm going to sound like I have a gray beard here, but this was before the internet was like a thing. Like it
mm-hmm,
existed, but like no one would even like it was calling into bulletin boards and with your
mm-hmm.
modem and like having these like you're being friends with someone down the street. So basically, I became obsessed with video games. I was really, really good at the Doom 2 video game,
Yeah.
like nationally, like really good.
Wow.
And I went to this private high school. I was fortunate to go to this private high school, and they had a computer science department, which was like impossible, like very rare. And the teacher literally spoke to me and says, "I'm concerned about you because you can't make any money with video games." And now that actually seems like the dumbest answer ever.
It's insane
Probably
looking
would make
back.
more money with video games. But at the time, it was like, so I got so passionate about Doom 2, which is it was, or basically, it was fake 3D. And then I was thinking, like, wow, how is it? Because Doom 2 came out of like nowhere. It was like, you got games that are not that great. And then all of a sudden, like, holy crap. So I actually became interested in how that was possible. And going to like computers they were still slow, but somehow this game was fast. So I started to get into the math, and I went to the computer science program, started using Pascal programming language, making 3D shapes, learning how to do perspective texture mapping, like all of it. But it was like it wasn't a chore. It was like exciting because I was able to see something that I loved, the video game,
Uh-huh.
and try to emulate it. So that was really where the journey started, and I just became obsessed with it. So then went to college. During college, I worked at Citrix, or it was actually called Expert City, but they did Go to My PC and Go to Meeting. I'm sure you guys have heard of that or used that at some point. So that was my first real kind of job. I was very fortunate. Um, and at the time I was kind of lucky because I had some good friends at the company and they kind of like made me seem better than I was. I think the founder regretted hiring me. Too late, sucker.
You're in. Once you're in, you're good.
And from that, started just getting coworker friends, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the engineers at Picasa, which was at the time where iPhoto was king of the hill and nothing on Windows was good. I was working on that. So that was doing desktop application work. I started working on Picasa web albums, which was bringing the photos to the website. And
Yeah.
the company literally was about to go bankrupt. And whenever you have like moments where it's like, it's either going to happen or not, that's kind of when things happen. And
Mm-hmm.
Google was like, hey, this is a small team. It'd be awesome if we had a photo solution because Yahoo had something at the time. So we got snapped up, and that kind of like started the Google experience, and that was an extreme catalyst. Like I was very fortunate to be there. Like Google wasn't knocking down my door saying we need Sean. I was it was kind of right place, right time.
Mm.
So I'm very humble with that. I'm very thankful that I was able to experience that. And then really Google basically gives you the confidence because you get your, or if you do a computer science degree, you're like, okay, I think I know what I'm doing. You start working, and but just like when I was talking about the BBS stuff before the internet, it's like these pockets. If you go to a small company, it's like these pockets of different companies. You're like, okay, I think I'm good. I'm good at this company, but how do I compare to other companies?
Right. Yeah.
So you can't work everywhere, but Google allowed it because it was at the time 30,000 employees. Now now it's way more than that, but
Mm-hmm.
you're like, and it's the best of breed. So you're like,
Mm-hmm.
finally, you're like, I know how big the world is. I know where I fit.
Mm-hmm.
I know how good I am now because I'm comparing myself to other people. So once you get that confidence, you're then able to, I mean, as weird as it sounds, they kind of train you to leave, right? Because now
Interesting.
it's like get out of the house.
Now you want something bigger and
Yeah,
like
because you
better,
can like
like
I know what to do.
right. So with
So
that kind of your motivation to move to go to this like entrepreneurial journey, like you felt like you had done what you need to at Google and wanted to
I
try it on
felt like
your
I
own.
was doing so. I mean, that Google salary sounds great, right? That's pretty nice. There's a lot of perks for being there, but eventually you're kind of like, where do I want to be in life? Do I want to have this like awesome thing that I own, or am I a corporate employee? I mean, nothing wrong with that, but I was kind
Mm-hmm.
of like doing some soul searching, and also was exploring getting married at the time. Which then you're like, well, what happens if leaving? Like, basically, you got an amazing solution or working experience happening right now. Would you give that up for a roll of the dice? I mean,
Mm,
you can't do a selfish answer on that. You got to talk to your partner about that.
for sure.
So there's just a lot of things going on. I'm 100% grateful that I took that leap. It's been like, it hasn't been like one day after I left, it wasn't like, oh my God, I made it. Like there's definitely been days that sucked real bad.
Mm,
Um, but I was able to stick through it. And I'm not saying I'm at the finish line now. This journey is still going strong, but we're definitely at a place where it's feeling super awesome, right? I
mm-hmm.
love the fact that Xano exists. Um, just because I mean, it's basically my life's work. And honestly, I think the original motivation was to automate myself out of the picture. Like anything that I could do, someone else should do,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're trying to do.
So with that train of thoughts, like what's and maybe those are uh like thoughts for the conclusion, but like so what's the future for you and the company? Like how do you envision things in the future? Just gonna keep growing the company? Do you have
Yeah. So right now, our our target user really is kind of like technical entrepreneurs. Like, I mean, honestly, you're the target user, but or you're one of our more advanced users. I didn't realize until recently that you were a software engineer previously,
mm.
but I do remember watching your videos. I'm like, dude, this guy knows what he's doing. I'm like, I wonder if everyone knows what they're doing. Like, no, they don't. So that now makes sense why you were so good at certain things. But so we want to make this more accessible to people that don't know anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
They still need to know that they need a backend. Like some of these tools are a one-stop shop, and if that's all you need, like if it's a lightweight project, sounds good. But we want, if people start realizing like, oh, hey, maybe I need to think about this a little bit more, we want them to come to Xano and not get scared.
Right.
So, excuse me, it's our job to just make sure that we've done enough abstraction, and we're still in that journey where you can just, and like I said in the very beginning, like we wanted to, like anything you would, if you had to tell your grandpa what you just did, like it should look like that. So your grandpa would know, like, oh, look, it's three things, right?
Right.
So we want to do more stuff like that, just so that you can kind of talk at a high level about what this API is doing, right? You don't
Right.
need to do a paragraph explanation on intimate details on transforming text here and there. You just want to say, like, listen, it's doing A, B, and C. Done.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want more detail, go into it. But from a high level point of view, that's what we want it to look like and feel like. Like we
Mm-hmm.
don't want, if you don't need to get into the details, you shouldn't be bothered by it. So we're still trying to make that better. There's a ton of users um, that we're not a perfect fit for, just because we're a little bit too advanced, and we don't like we don't want to tell someone, hey, you got to learn all these developer concepts
Mm.
to then appreciate Xano.
Yeah.
So I mean, that'd be nice, but I mean, the attention span is only so much. So we're trying
Yeah.
to just make it so it just kind of clicks more. So we're that's the milestone we're constantly trying to get closer to.
Got it. And what do you think, so more broadly, like beyond Xano and beyond DriveBit? And I mean, looking back, it's a little side note, but it was kind of amazing how you guys were starting all that work before the no code movement really became more known and more popular. But so, uh, flash forward now, like how do you guys envision the evolution of the no code movement? Do you envision that keep growing and growing? Do you think we've reached some kind of a that it will stabilize at some point and we'll have more of a cohabitation between the low code and no code? Like, do you even care? Like, do you spend enough time thinking about where that movement is going?
Well, we're very fortunate that the no code movement is there because it feels like we kind of have somewhat of a home. Like there's definitely people, so we're not the perfect fit for everyone in the no code movement, but there's definitely a good fit for the majority. And we're really embracing no code instead of low code, just
Mm-hmm.
because,
Yeah.
and that was kind of going back to the history of Xamarin for selfish reasons. Like we just wanted our employees to do the job and not like you don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So um, ideally, this tool could just be used. So we were kind
Mm-hmm.
of, I mean, that was kind of the original motivation behind it. But now I think it makes sense because I want everyone to be able to do this stuff. You don't need to have a computer science degree to do stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. We're trying to lower the barrier of entry for people to be productive and kind of like take control of all these cool ideas, right? If you have a cool idea, you don't want to spend 10,000, 25,000, even more. It'd be awesome if you could build something yourself. It may not be as good as someone else, but at least it's like a start, right? You can keep and part of the journey is iteration.
Right.
No
Yep.
one's V1 is awesome,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you can like if you realize it's okay to iterate, and you're going to get better over time, all of a sudden you're like turning into a pro.
Yeah. No, for sure. We do agree at Drybit and me personally. I think that's one of the biggest opportunity for the no code movement is that it's not only just making things that were expensive cheaper, but also there are a whole category of ideas and people who had maybe what they would think are silly ideas that now, just because the financial have changed, are completely worth it. Now you can have like a little business that only make, I don't know, 10K a month, but if it costs you like literally $150 to run, like it's all of a sudden it's worth it and never be
Oh yeah,
big. And so I think we're on the same page on that. That's a pretty big opportunity.
yeah, 100%.
All right, well, I know we over, so I want to, I don't know if there's anything that we didn't get a chance to talk to that you wanted to add or cover.
Uh, I mean, nothing's coming to mind. I think this was super cool.
All right. Well, so if that's the case, thank you so much. Really, like I said, this was the first kind of no-code interviews for me. Hopefully, we'll do that every month with founder of no-code tools and services. And again, as a big Xano fan myself, I was really excited to be able to talk to you. What should people do if they listen to that and they want to learn more about Xano? Like, what do you recommend to be the next step for them?
So yeah, definitely go to our webpage, xano.com, xano.com.
Mm-hmm.
We've got tons of information. I saw some other questions about security. We go into detail on all of that. Our YouTube channel is overflowing with content. So there's got to be something that's interesting there. And you kind of like go down this rabbit hole of like, oh, that was interesting. Oh, that. So you get to see all these cool examples. Some videos are real short, some are longer. It depends on how in depth we go. But there's tons of stuff to check out.
I know. I've seen Michael producing a ton of content. It's always impressive to see him deliver all that content. It's really cool. The whole team has been doing a fantastic job. So again, thank you very much, Sean. Thank you everybody in the live chat who posted questions and said hi and things like that. So really appreciate it. And with that, I'll say bye for now.
All right. Thank you so much. This was great.
Bye.